The Archangel Chronicles, Chapter 23, The Nerge, by Raymond Collodi, copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Shadows fading light. We're caught in burning fire, almost falling from the sky, and the sun may tear the wings of us like Icarus. We fly with courage and bravado, fly with passion in our hearts, and reliance in the power of love will guide us safe to shore.
Abu. It was well into the autumn when Aduthuma and I, together with our pack horses, and Zephyria, started the long journey from the sacred mountains to the place where the Massagetae were encamped. Zephyria sat on her perch, quietly and hooded, at night. During the day, for long periods of time, she flew ahead of us. I had visions of what she could see, high above the plains below. We were a tiny group of creatures amidst a rolling sea of grass, stretching as far as her keen eyes could see. We descended from the high country of the sacred mountains to the plains flanked by rolling hills. For the most part, we kept to the ridges and hilltops so that we could survey the plains below. Once or twice a week, we would stop for a time to hunt. Zephyria would then perform her magic, spotting rabbits, pheasants, and grouse with her amazing eyes and swooping in for the kill. My master Aduthuma said that each of his eagles brought him prosperity, and I began to see why. Although we spent many long nights in the saddle, traveling many leagues from dawn until past dusk, we never lacked for fresh game, nor were we ever lost. Through the eagle's eyes, as she soared on the rising currents of air, I could see the path before us for many leagues. For a time each morning, when the sun peered above the horizon, painting the sky and clouds with violet and purple hues, we would let Zephyria loose, and she surveyed the sky and the ground before us. I could close my eyes. My horse would pick her way through the hillside grass as I emptied all thought from my mind. I took deep breaths, and my mind would descend into a deep trance. Then, like peering through a fog into a bright sunlit path, my vision flashed wide open, and I could see through her eyes. Time stood still, but I would be brought back to awareness by a call from Zephyria. She would return to her perch on my arm and take her reward of fresh meat. I would tell my master Aduthuma what I saw, and we would plan our camp for that evening in a suitable place on a hilltop. On nights with a moon, the landscape was lit with a soft glow. The nights were chilly with a hint of the approaching winter. On moonless nights, the skies were full of stars, and often strange lights in the north would dance above us, painting the skies with ghostly colors of light greens or reds or brilliant whites. The air was so clear and crisp those nights that we could see many, many leagues before us. We were heading west, following the stars, toward the place where the river the Greeks call Oxus empties into the Aral Sea. Keeping to the mountains and ridges, we passed an ancient city my master called Maracanda, spread out on the plain far below us. At night we could see a cluster of twinkling, dancing lights of many fires and lanterns shining in the vast darkness below us. This ancient city was to be avoided. Aduthuma and his eagles would be a valuable commodity and would be seized by the local authorities, who may not look kindly on our small retinue. From the heights above this city, we turned north and descended from the mountains back onto a fertile rolling landscape. Always we held to the higher places, the ridges and the hillocks, where we could see the countryside. We began to travel at night when the conditions of the moon and stars would allow, in order to avoid detection. We were 4 or 5 days out from the Massagetae camp. After traveling all night, we had stopped and bedded down on a ridge of sand dunes along a fertile plain. I awoke and stretched. In the hazy distance was the river Oxus, winding its way across the dusty landscape. From a distance, this river and its lush banks and marshes looked like a giant green snake winding its way out of sight. Here was another river of life, much like the river Nile in my own country. Along the banks of the great rivers of life, green trees and marshes abounded, but far away from the river, the landscape was parched and colorless. Aduthuma was standing silently, looking into the distance south of the great river. He heard my footsteps and motioned me over. He pointed, and I followed his finger to where he was pointing. Tiny in the distance, I could see a cloud of dust blown by the wind. "Enemy," said Aduthuma. "Many, but we must get closer and see. Bring Zephyria, send her there, and tell me what she sees." I fetched Zephyria from her perch and set her on my gloved arm. I performed the noble gestures, and removing her hood, I whispered to her, "Fly, my precious spirit, high above the plains, and take us to the place where that dust arises. I shall see what you see through your eyes." With that, I let go of the traces and flung her into the air. Several great strokes of her wings soon brought her climbing, circling higher and higher. She caught an updraft, and wings outstretched, ascended until she was but a speck in the sky. Then she turned and headed toward the column of dusk. I sat down on a blanket, cross-legged, and closed my eyes. I removed all thought from my mind and listened to my breathing. My consciousness ascended to a place beyond myself. My mind entered Zephyria's spirit, and I began to see through her eyes. I raced towards the billowing column of dust in the distance. As she grew closer, I could see that it was coming from what looked like a long, black creature that resembled a giant millipede. As she flew closer, and details began to emerge, there were indeed many feet and hooves pounding the arid plain, raising such a cloud of dust from the arid soil. The feet belonged to a large body of marching spearmen, and the hooves to an even larger line of horse warriors. She flew around them at a great height, and I could see that the line of these warriors stretched many leagues into the distance from where they came. Zephyria turned and went to the head of the column, then turned back again. Now she dove, gathering speed, until she was at treetop level, the air rushing by her ears. The horsemen were mounted and armored in silver scale, as were their horses. At the head of the column, I saw a silk-clad warrior in gold-scale armor with a high, pointy helm, which curved into the likeness of a boar. Behind this man was a standard, trailing a long, kite-like tail. The top of the standard was the head of a large, tusked boar. I saw another man, riding a tall, armored horse, richly dressed in scarlet silks, his long black hair tucked under a helm crusted by a diadem. Behind this man was a standard bearer holding another banner of a sun with rays surrounded by a disk. There were elephants and their trunks were painted red. Sitting on their necks were their handlers, the mahouts, half hidden by plumes of white ostrich feathers. Wicker castle-like towers were strapped to their backs. Each tower held 3 or 4 archers. Collars of bells tingled from their necks and chimed with the gait of the great beasts as they marched across the plain. Finally, a league or 2 behind the head of the column was a baggage train containing innumerable wagons, carts, chariots, gilded carriages, mules, and camels bearing their burdens. I saw that our presence had been noticed as Zephyria flew by, and arrows, sling bullets, and other missiles began to whistle by, but we were too fast, and they missed. Zephyria wheeled around and began to climb, looking for another updraft. We looked back at the column far below, and she flew back to where Aduthuma and I were waiting. I opened my eyes and stood, arms stretched, to receive Zephyria on my outstretched arm. She had done well. I turned to Aduthuma. There's an army on the march. Many thousands of armored horsemen, foot soldiers, and horse archers. They are following the standard of a black boar and another of a sun disk. And there are elephants. Come, boy. Now we must find the queen, he said. Adam. The Nerge had been unfolding as it should. The riders had been assembled, many thousands of them, in long lines, dozens of kilometers in length, on the grassy plain. Each end was commanded by the marshals, Scumaxa and Protothesis. Axia and her retinue were in the middle of the line. Each rider was a spear's length distance from the other. Orders were given by different color flags, held by special riders dispersed every few hundred meters from each other, and by heralds blowing ram's horns about a kilometer or so apart. The job of the riders was to slowly move outwards and then inwards in response to the commands issued from the center by Axia. Those riders at the end of the lines were commanded to advance, while those in the middle did not at first move. The spacing between the riders was enforced through rigid discipline imposed by officers riding up and down the line. At a signal, the line began to advance. The ends moved faster, and the center and the flanks not quite as fast, until the entire host began to form an arc looking like a crescent moon. The ends moved towards each other in stages, so that the line became, as the days unfolded, an ellipse many kilometers in diameter. Once the ends of the line closed to the point where they became a closed ellipse, the spacing between the riders was gradually reduced, thus tightening the noose. Mixed in amongst the riders were packs of hunting dogs trained for the purpose. The riders beat upon their small round shields with their spears. The dogs howled, and the riders yipped and cried to each other. The noise was meant to startle any animals within the ellipse, causing them to flee inwards. The ellipse contracted for many days, the riders working in shifts. Strict discipline required that no animal be allowed to escape the cordon. The riders had been divided into 2 divisions. Those commanded by Scumaxa wore a red tunic, and those commanded by Protothesis wore blue. The hunt progressed each day, the ellipse contracting to the point where it encompassed a tract of land, to the extent of about 1 day's march around its circumference. Then the trumpets and horns blared, and the host came to rest. Tents were set up, and guards posted all along the perimeter. We gathered at the final night of the hunt at Axia's tent for another feast. Fires were lit all along the line, flickering far into the distance. Tables were set up in Axia's pavilion, and a large cooking fire was blazing in the center. Axia reclined at her high table, flanked as always by her priestesses, attending to her every need. Theron, Scarus, and I reclined at our own table. Arsalion sat in a place of honor as the champion of the hunt. Scumaxa and Protothesis were to his left and right. Arsalion was enjoying the feast, drinking cup after cup of the fermented mare's milk drink of the steppe peoples, alternating this with Theron's unwatered Greek wine. He was in a very merry mood, as were his two companions. Well into the evening, Arsalion stood up, swaying slightly, and climbed to the top of his table. "Friends and allies," he announced, "most worthy masters of the hunt, and my companions, Scumaxa and Protothesis, I make my toast to the gods of the hunt." With that, he tipped his cup and poured a libation. "May we taste the fresh meat of our game on the morrow." Scumaxa followed him, rising up from where he had been reclining at table. "To our champion, friend and ally, Prince of the Roxolani, may the gods of fortune bring us safely back to camp tomorrow." A round of approval and the draining of cups followed. Protothesis now stood up and raised his cup. "And for our special friend Arsalion, and you, my sister queen, I have a gift," he replied. Axia, who up to this point in time had followed Arsalion's every move from across the room, lost in thought, suddenly focused on the conversation. "Gift, my brother? What gift?" she said. "Sister Queen, my marshals tell me that they have sighted a tiger amongst the game within the Nerge. On the morrow, as champion, Arsalion may accompany you, my queen, to slay the most majestic of all beasts." Axia smiled and looked at Arsalion, her bright eyes twinkling. "What say you, my prince? Will you protect she who is worthy of armor while she hunts this dangerous creature?" I would come between you and the beast. I would lay down my life for you, my Vasilisa." The final stage of the great hunt began early the next morning at dawn. The sun began its climb into a flawless, deep blue sky, dispelling the night mists. A burst of horns, trumpets, and drums aroused the camp, and the servants readied the horses of the royal party. Axia and her champion rode out at the head of the hunting party, followed by her two brothers, Theron, Scarus, and me. Axia, her two brothers, and Arsalion galloped off quickly to the place where the tiger had last been spotted, leaving the rest of us behind. We were not nearly so skilled enough horsemen to ride headlong at breakneck speed through this land of grasses, boulders, and scrub brush. Scumaxa and one of his skilled hunters tracked the tiger. Protothesis, Arsalion, and Axia stopped at the edge of a copse of trees and dismounted. "The tigress, my sister queen, is in this forest. There is a path here which passes through it. It is wide enough for only one person to pass through at a time. I think you should walk in. But beware, this creature is dangerous. It has fled to this place. It knows there is nowhere else to go, and fear will multiply her prowess and power. I do not like this, my queen. You will be in danger." "Brother Prince, what kind of queen would I be in the eyes of my people if I did not take the first game of the hunt? This tigress is queen of these woods, and I am queen of my people. I must go." Scumaxa turned to Arsalion. "My prince, perhaps you should go first then, and draw the beast out." "No," said Axia, "I shall go first. Let it not be said that they put this pretty-faced Sarmatian prince in danger because I was afraid of what we may find." "As you wish, sister queen," said Protothesis. "Scumaxa and I will ride to the other side of these woods. Wait until you hear our signal, then come up the path. We will drive the tiger towards you. But what weapon will you use? Your bow? That may not stop a tigress in full charge, said Skumaxa. Axia shook her head. I will use the bows and arrows of my ancestors, brother. Then let Arsalion take this stout boar spear and at least keep him at your side, said Protothesis. The early morning sun was at their backs, casting long shadows. The sun was still too low to penetrate the gloom and the coolness of the forest. The further Arsalion and Axia penetrated into the dark woods, the deeper the shadows became. The closely spaced trees suppressed any sound outside of the woods. Silence except for the furtive clicks and chirps of some birds, and the raspy caw of a raven high up in the canopy prevailed. The brush in the trees curved over the pathway, forming a green tunnel into the forest, blocking out any ability to see to the left or to the right. Axia stepped carefully like a dancer down the path, so as not to break a twig or disturb the brush. Arsalion was not as careful, as his spear often caught on the overhanging branches, or he stumbled over a root. Each of these sounds sent a wave of birds skittering through the branches and drew a reproachful stare from Axia. Axia had her bow at the ready, with an arrow notched and 3 more in her draw hand. They reached a point where the tunnel through the woods lightened towards its end, and they could see that they were coming to a clearing. As quietly as possible, and with careful, deliberate steps, they emerged into the meadow in the middle of the woods. The sun was still low on the horizon to the east, as it was still early in the morning. It cast a golden glow on the tops of the majestic trees on the other side of the meadow. As soon as they cleared the path, and there was room, Arsalion stepped up beside Axia with his spear at the ready. The trees around the clearing overhung the meadow, and there, perched on finger-like branches, were about a dozen ravens, hunched up as if they were getting ready to fly. The silence was oppressive. The air was heavy and damp. The shadows obscured the edges of the meadow. Axia and Arsalion saw something. A heap of carcasses and animal skins, punctuated here and there with the skulls and bones and horns of antelopes. The stench of rotting flesh was palpable. Every fiber of nerve and instinct within Axia and Arsalion warned that danger was near. They crept closer to the pile of carcasses and began to circle it, looking into the forest, trying to find their prey. Suddenly, the air was pierced with a shriek and the flapping of wings as all the ravens rose into the sky, screaming like harpies. And at that very moment, with a guttural roar that shook one to the very marrow, an enormous tiger bounded out from the woods. In 3 mighty bounds, she was upon them, and with one last jump, high in the air, eyes blazing, mouth snarling and claws extended, she dove for Axia. Axia instantly took aim and was at the very point of releasing her arrow when her hand was struck by something that sent the bow and arrows flying. At the same instant, Arsalion stepped in front of her and came between the attacking tiger and Axia, knee to the ground, butting the end of his spear and pointing the deadly blade towards the leaping tiger. He took the full force of the charge, his spear catching the tiger in the mouth and coming out the back of her head. He disappeared beneath the dead weight of the tiger's carcass, which landed squarely upon him, crushing him. He lost all consciousness. Axia stood to her feet, drew her sword, and stood over the entangled bodies of the tiger and the prince. There was no movement, no sign of life. Then out of the silence came the sound of missiles piercing the air. Axia was simultaneously struck by 3 arrows. The first grazed her cheek and nicked her earlobe, drawing blood. The second glanced off her scale armor and struck her left hand. The third pierced her upper thigh. The force of these arrows sent Axia spinning, and she landed on her back, stunned. 2 of the arrows caused little injury, but the point of the third, which pierced her thigh, had come out the other side, tearing the flesh. The wound was bleeding profusely. Axia sat up, her head swimming. She heard footsteps, and a shadow passed over her. She looked up, and there, backlit by the sun, was a figure clad entirely in black, carrying a bow. The assassin's face was masked in scarves. The figure drew a slashing sword, a spatha from its sheath, and raised it high over his head. Axia Panoplides, so-called Queen of the Massagetae, apologies, but I must have your head. Assassin, hissed Axia, you are cursed. You lie in wait, without honor like a serpent, to strike down your prey unawares. You will die a miserable death without honor. The assassin laughed. It looks to me I will collect 2 heads today. The usurper queen of the Massagetae and her lover, the pretty-faced Roxolani prince. I will be a wealthy man when I ransom your heads for their weight in gold. Arsalion, who had been smothered by the tiger, was silent. Axia thought he had been killed. But suddenly, beneath the carcass, he gasped and moaned and began to struggle under the weight. These movements distracted the assassin for a moment, and he turned, but then came back to Axia and raised his sword, ready to strike her again. A shadow passed behind the assassin. The air was pierced by the screech of an eagle, diving, wings outstretched at enormous speed toward the assassin's back. Its legs outstretched and talons open, the eagle struck the confused assassin like a pile driver, talons closing around the back of his neck, severing an artery and spurting blood between its deadly claws. The force of the blow knocked the assassin clear off his feet, sent him sprawling as he desperately tried, in vain, to dislodge the great bird from his back. He landed on his face, his body twitching with spasms. I had been against Axia going into the forest in the first place, but all my pleading and her brothers and Arsalions fell on deaf ears. The steppe peoples have their way, and they would not deviate from tradition and the glorious feat of slaying a tiger as the first victim of the Nerge. So I stood by and watched Axia and her suitor go into the dark woods together. Time had passed slowly, and my anxiety had increased with every passing moment. It was the screams of the ravens that spurred me to action. I had seen a score of them rising from the woods, screaming bloody murder. And at the same moment, behind me came a call from a familiar voice. Kyrios! Kyrios! The queen is in great danger. She has been felled by an assassin. Hurry! We must save her. Our party sprang into action, and grabbing our weapons, ran into the forest. We ran as fast as we could along the darkened path, through the trees and brush, and came out into the clearing. Abu was running ahead. Vasilisa! I shouted as I emerged from the opening in the meadow. Skumaxa and Protothesis entered the clearing from the opposite side and broke into a run. We all converged on the center of the clearing. There, to our great surprise, we saw a very large and impressive eagle with blood-stained talons standing on top her prey. Abu whistled and held up his gloved arm. The majestic bird flew to him, and he gave her a reward. I came up to Axia. Her right thigh had been pierced by an arrow. The point had passed through the flesh and was protruding on the other side. She was weak from loss of blood. I looked at the wound. "You are lucky, Vasilisa. It missed the bone and main arteries, but you must now put on a tourniquet and staunch the wound. This is going to hurt. Skumaxa, give me an arrow. Vasilisa, look at me. Put this arrow shaft in your mouth. Bite down hard. It will help with the pain." I took a knife and cut both ends of the shaft of the arrow protruding from Axia's thigh as gently as I could. It would be best to leave the rest of the shaft inside the wound, as it would help stop the bleeding until I could get her to a place of safety. Every moment, every movement caused I tried to go as gently as possible. Axia tensed, but did not cry out. The wound was jagged and deep, but clean. I tore a cloth from Axia's silk caftan and bound the wound. It seemed to work. "We need to get her back to camp, where I can finish this and stitch her up." I heard a moan coming from under the bloody tiger carcass. Protothesis and Skumaxa rolled the beast over, and beneath found Arsalion, very bruised and battered, but now conscious and breathing. He opened an eye and looked up at me. "Am I alive?" "You have been hiding beneath a very large tiger, my prince," I said. He coughed and sputtered. With some help from Axia's brothers, he managed to sit up. I thought my challenges were over," he said, recovering his breath. "I had no idea that the first 3 challenges would lead to this deadly embrace with a tigress." I laughed. "It seems to me, my prince, that you have tamed 2 tigresses today." I looked to Axia. She was in pain, but nodded and smiled, averting her eyes. Back at the camp, I tended to irrigating, stitching, and dressing Axia's wounds, and checked out Arsalion. He had several cracked ribs and some massive bruises, but otherwise was intact, although he would be sore for some days to come. A council of war was summoned of all the marshals and commanders of the Massagetae host and the Roxolani Sarmatian allies. Skumaxa arose and surveyed the officers and leaders sitting cross-legged around him in the great hall. "Warriors, friends, allies, there is much news to share with you tonight. There are spies in this camp, and they have tried and failed to kill she who is worthy of armor. They are our enemies converging on us as we speak. Listen to what Aduthuma, our Eagle Master, has to say." Aduthuma came forth. "We were summoned to the Nerge several moons ago. We traveled from the sacred mountains with our new Belapan Zephyria, who is a gift from the gods. About a fortnight ago, we saw in the distance the dust of a large force of warriors headed this way." Aduthuma motioned to Abu to come forward. "This is Abu, my worthy apprentice. It was he who captured and trained the Belapan and formed a bond with her. He sees through her eyes when she is in flight. I sent the eagle towards the distant cloud of dust to discern better what it was. Now, boy, you speak as a man, and you tell your fellow warriors what you saw through the eagle's eyes." Abu stepped forward. He was no longer a boy. In the time that he had been away, he had grown taller and had found his spirit and purpose. Although he was still young, he had a confidence and a presence far greater than his age. He spoke plainly and without hesitation. "There was an army. I saw horses covered with scaled armor and mounted by armored warriors with long lances. I saw horse archers and spearmen approaching. I saw a score of elephants, dressed in armor and carrying wicker towers on their backs with archers in them. The column was 3 or 4 leagues in length, and many thousands of warriors. At the head I saw a standard with a black boar's head, and the head of the column a man in gilded scaled armor with a high pointed helm crested with the symbol of a boar. And beside him there was another warrior with a banner of a blazing sun and disk. This army is headed this way. We raced ahead to warn the queen. Zephyria found her and followed her into the woods. Zephyria, brave spirit that she is, saw the assassin and smote him. A horn blared and one side of the crowd parted. The priestesses, carrying Axia on a litter, entered the great hall and proceeded to the middle of the tent. "Vasilisa," I said, "you should be resting. Your wound." "Adam the Wise, I cannot stay idle while these great events unfold. My people expect their queen to lead them." She turned to Abu. "You are no longer a boy, nor an apprentice, Abukar the Egyptian. You are now a master of eagles, and you have done well. We owe you much. It is time for you to be named according to the custom of our people. You have left behind the things of childhood and the foolishness of adolescence. Kneel, master of the eagles, and all hail your service to the nation." The assembly rose to their feet. They shouted, "Hail to the Eagle Master!" and clapped and pounded the floor with their feet. Axia gestured Abu to come to her litter. Propped up by an elbow, wincing in pain with the effort, she drew her sword out of its scabbard lying beside her. "From this time on, you are no longer Abukar the Egyptian. You will now be called Targetus, he whose sight is far-reaching. You are now a man, a warrior of the steppes, whom all will honor and respect." Again the assembly took up the cry, "Hail, hail, Targetus, master of eagles!" As the cries died down, Axia spoke again. "Aduthuma, lord of the eagles, come forth." Aduthuma, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd, took his hat off, bowed, and came forward. "We honor you as well, my lord. You have done well to teach Targetus. We will reward you for your service. Songs will be sung of your skill. You are a credit to the nation." He bowed and humbly moved back to his place amongst the officers. Axia now looked to me. "How fares our Prince Arsalion, Adam the Wise?" I bowed and spoke. "He is recovering, my queen. He took a mighty blow, and is very bruised and sore. I fear he may have several cracked ribs, which will slow him down, as well as some nasty scratches. But other than that, he has no broken bones, nor other wounds." "This is good, my lord. See that you spare no effort to comfort him, for he has also done great service to us." Axia looked to her 2 brothers. "Brother princes, you have heard the Eagle Master's report. The standard of the boar is that of the usurper enemy Artaxes. The banner of the blazing sun and disk and the armored lancers are cataphracts from Parthia, as are the elephants. Artaxes has drawn aid from the Parthians and seeks our destruction. What is your counsel?" Scumaxa turned to his own retinue and made a gesture. The warriors behind him parted, and 2 miserable-looking men, naked but for a loincloth, covered with multitudes of cuts and bruises, their arms bound behind them, were thrust forward onto their knees. "Sister Queen," he said, "we caught these men in the camp. They are Artaxes' spies. They have watched your movements and warned Artaxes' assassins that you would be leading the Nerge. It was they that gave us word of the presence of the tiger. It was a trap. You were lured to a place where the assassin could do his work." "Bring them to me," Axia ordered. These men were poked and prodded with whips and spears to kneel before the queen. "I think I should have your skulls for my drinking cup. She lifted her hand in command. Protothesis, give me their heads. Protothesis stepped forward, drawing his spatha. The spies were forced to put their foreheads in the dust, exposing their necks. Protothesis raised his blade high over his head, aiming to make a clean cut. Axia held up her hand. Wait, brother. I have better use for these wretches. Protothesis sheathed his sword. You are men without honor, who would hide in the shadows and kill us in secret. We shall send you back to your master Artaxes. Tell your false king that your mission failed. Tell him about the size of our host and that we are ready for battle. Tell him that I will have his skull to drink from when my father is buried in his kurgan, and you should go to him decorated with a necklace. That necklace shall be made of your severed fingers. Never again shall you hold a weapon in stealth, seeking to catch your betters unawares. May your necklaces remind you of your treachery. Let this be done. Protothesis now spoke. Sister Queen, Artaxes is less than a week's march from this place. Fortune is with us. The host has been assembled for the Nerge. They are armed and ready. They will hunt for the skins and scalps of our enemies and their Parthian allies. So it shall be, said Axia. She looked at me. She had overexerted herself to be here, her face pale. She spoke to me in a low, tired voice. Adam the Wise, I need your healing skills. I must be mounted to meet Artaxes and the Parthians in battle within the week. Please see to it.
Nothing is untrue, nothing don't matter. It's all notions of our emotions, of everything we are and what we belong to, how we reach our destination. Shadows fading light. We're caught in burning fire, almost falling from the sky. And the sun may tear the wings of us like Icarus. We fly, fly with courage and bravado, fly with passion in our hearts, and reliance in the power of love will guide us safe to shore.
Music for Chapter 24. Epidemic Sound, Like Icarius We Fly by Ethan Martin. An Ordinary Day by Descant. Godsend by Johannes Bornhoff. March Across an Ancient Land by John Abbott. The Portal by Bonnie Grace. Whispering Thoughts by Experia. Shunt by Prosody. Return of Light by Christopher Moe Ditlevson. Camp of No Return by Experia. Valley of Drakes by Dragon Tamer. Army of Angels by Edgar Hopp. Riot by Thomas Nova. Ed Records, Iron Dust. Ed Records, Save the World. Ed Records, Beyond All Fears. Danger by Alexander Vazinin. The Last Frontier by Alexander Vazinin. Stomp by Vital. The Archangel Chronicles. Copyright 2023 by Raymond Collodi, all rights reserved.
And the sun may tear the wings of us like Icarus, we fly, caught in a burning fire. And the sun may tear the wings of us like Icarus, we fly.